I would like to once again reassure the women of this nation that the National Cancer Institute stands today by its recommendation of mammography screening beginning in women in their 40s, and that we are doing everything we can so that tomorrow we can improve prevention, screening, treatment, and supportive care so that we will continue these encouraging trends in survival that we have seen over the last decade. I thank you for the opportunity to testify about this vitally important topic, and I will be pleased later to respond to your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Doctor, and I just want to be sure it is the National Cancer Institute's position that women should continue to get annual mammograms starting at age 40?
Every 1 to 2 years, Senator, is our recommendation. Whether there is a difference between every year or at least once between 1 and 2 years is still not absolutely determined, but at least 1 to every 2 years.
Thank you. You're familiar with the Danish study done by 2 very eminent biostatisticians. Because of just logistics, they couldn't come today, though we acknowledge the cooperation of the Danish embassy, and with unanimous consent, I'm going to enter their study into the record. My question is, Doctor, you've read the Danish study of Doctors Olsen and Gotschke.
Yes.
And also the PDQ, which is really an advisory board to the NIH, NCI, has also raised yellow flashing lights. Could you give us your comments and analysis of the Danish study, and if you care to comment on PDQ, a board member who will be testifying later? Because this is, you've just said the position we've had clearly since you've said it clearly, and the position's been clear since 1997. We welcome your commentary on these 2 studies that essentially dispute what you've just said.
In summary, the investigators that you addressed looked at the 7 randomized trials, made decisions about certain aspects of those trials in terms of how much they would weight them or include them in a combined analysis of the information called a meta-analysis. And based on their judgments and their decisions about the relative value of some of those studies, they eliminated some of them from the ultimate analysis. And then when they applied their meta-analysis, concluded that the information was not significant enough to warrant continued support of mammography. Other statisticians, other experts, have looked at their analysis and have raised concerns about many of the judgments that they made on a statistical basis. And so there is difference of opinion regarding experts as to how one should evaluate those 7 combined trials. Other experts have looked at that information and have concluded, as the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force has, that the data still supports the value of mammography in the equation that I pointed out, and must continue to remain an important part of that equation. So the issue here, Senator, is a difference in statistical interpretation and methodology. From the scientific perspective, there is value in that argument. From the clinical perspective, however, one must conclude that there is no indication that mammography should not be in that equation based on that analysis, even if you may want to argue whether it's providing the major part of that equation or a component of it.
Doctor, I have time for one more question. Essentially, what you're saying is one group of biostatisticians came to one set of conclusions and another have come to another, both competent people.
Correct.
We're now into really, again, lack of clarity, and I'm not saying from you. My question is, do you think there have only been 7 studies over 40 years in terms of the efficacy of mammograms in early detection? Do you think it's time to do another study?
No, I do not. Those studies...
Would you comment on that? Because it would seem like we need then kind of a study to settle the disputes about the other studies.
Those studies over that period of time enrolled over 400,000 patients. And over that period of time, much has changed with regard to the state-of-the-art of mammography and our state-of-the-art with regard to breast cancer care. To attempt to repeat that kind of study in which there would be a randomization that women, by the flip of a coin or by chance, would be assigned to either mammography or no mammography, would not, at this point in time, be a viable or rational study, in my opinion, one that would not likely be able to be carried out at this point in time. Certainly not, I believe, under our current structure.
Doctor, isn't that true of any clinical trial? Some get the treatment and some don't. Some get the diagnosis, some...
In terms of being able to attract a sufficient number of patients to the trial, and in terms of being able to get them to accept a randomization by flip of the coin to whether they would or would not get mammography, I have, and I believe others have, serious concerns that that kind of trial could not effectively be carried out in a reasonable period of time to get a conclusive answer to the question. While in the meantime, where we believe we should be focusing our efforts is in even better methods of detection than mammography, and to look at newer technologies and their applications in the kind of clinical trials you're describing.
Senator Harkin.
Thank you, Senator Mikulski. Well, I've looked very carefully at the study that was done by Olson and Getze. I don't know if that's the way you pronounce his last name, Getze. I believe that's it. And it seems to me that they, first of all, as you pointed out, these were mammographies that were done in the 1960s and 70s, maybe early 80s. I don't know if it got into the 80s or not, but sometime in that time frame. And as you stated, we clearly have a better mammography right now, technologies than we had at that time. Secondly, Olson and Getze also, as I understand it, looked at the technical details of how the studies were set up.
Correct.
And if I'm not mistaken, that NCI or others have looked at this and basically refuted some of their findings based upon what happened later on. I'm sorry, this is a layman speaking here, not a doctor, not a biostatistician or anything like that. But it seems to me, as I read through it, that Olson and Getze looked at, let me put it in layman's terms, looked at one part of the studies. Based upon that, they said there was not conclusive evidence. They didn't really look at everything in all of the studies that were done. At least that's my layman's way of interpreting it. And based upon some statistical analysis they had done about how the groups were selected and who was screened and who was not screened,
correct,
they reached these decisions. But they didn't go on later on to find out that those were adjusted for, if I'm not mistaken, later on. Those anomalies, whatever they might have been, were adjusted for later on. Am I somewhat correct in that?
Yes, Senator, you're quite on track with regard to your interpretation, as I also see it. And I believe in the next panel there will be experts far more sophisticated than I with regard to biostatistics, but I am in agreement with your interpretation.
I know this, to the general public, this sounds like a lot of gobbledygook, and it's sometimes beyond my comprehension too, but if you read it and really get into it, I think I'm finding out that that they just look too narrowly at the studies. And secondly, not taking into account the new technologies we have and the development of better mammography screening that we have today.